Kira had always preferred silence. While her fellow Ashanti researchers filled their data logs with endless chatter about soil samples and atmospheric readings, she found peace in the quiet corners of the research facility. The small alien pressed her elongated fingers against the observation deck window, watching the twin suns of Zerion 7 paint the rocky landscape in shades of amber and gold. Her species had evolved on a world where loud noises meant predators were near. Even after thousands of years of civilization, the Ashanti still spoke in whispers and moved like shadows. It made them excellent scientists but terrible warriors. Not that it mattered much, the Galactic Council had kept peace for nearly 3 centuries. That peace shattered when the emergency beacon screamed through the facility. All personnel report to evacuation stations immediately. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. The voice belonged to Commander Hexus, the station chief. Even through the intercom, Kira could hear the fear that made his words shake. Around her, 24 researchers dropped their equipment and rushed toward the main corridor. Their panic filled the air with a smell like burning metal, the scent of Ashanti terror. Kira stayed by the window. She had run the evacuation drills 100 times, but something felt different about this emergency. The warning lights cast red shadows across her gray skin as she watched the sky. 3 bright dots grew larger against the sunset, moving too fast to be supply ships. Council evacuation vessels, coming in hot. Dr. Mellon grabbed her arm with trembling claws. Kira, we have to go now. The transport leaves in 10 minutes. What happened? Kira asked, though she suspected the answer would terrify her. The Devourers. They've broken through the Kepler defense line. The words hit Kira like ice water. Every civilized species knew about the Devourers, though most preferred not to think about them. Ancient biomechanical horrors that appeared every few thousand years to consume entire star systems. They turned planets into feeding grounds and left nothing but empty rock behind. The Council had built massive defensive barriers at the galaxy's edge, specifically to keep them out. How many systems have they taken? Kira whispered. 47 in the past 6 days, Mellon replied. The outer colonies are gone. We're abandoning everything beyond the core worlds. Kira's legs felt weak. 47 systems, billions of lives, all gone in less than a week. The evacuation transport landed with a heavy thud that shook the entire facility. Through the observation deck, Kira watched her colleagues stumble up the loading ramp carrying only emergency supplies. Their movements had the jerky, panicked quality of prey animals fleeing a forest fire. She should have been running with them. Every instinct screamed at her to follow the herd to safety. But as she turned toward the corridor, alarms began wailing from the transport bay. The ship's engines whined with mechanical stress, followed by the distinct crack of an overloaded power coupling. Engine failure, came the pilot's voice over the intercom. I can take 12 passengers maximum. Weight restrictions. Kira pressed herself against the wall as her colleagues argued in frightened whispers about who would stay behind. Their voices rose higher as panic set in. Dr. Mellon pushed past 3 younger researchers claiming seniority. Others invoked family obligations or critical research data. In the end, genetics decided. The smallest and lightest researchers got seats. Kira, despite being one of the more experienced scientists, stood with the unlucky group watching the transport disappear into the darkening sky. 15 Ashanti researchers remained on Zerion 7. Within an hour, 12 more had managed to squeeze aboard an automated cargo hauler that barely had life support. That left Kira and 2 others, Dr. Chen, an elderly atmospheric specialist, and Dr. Webb, a young geologist barely out of training. We'll wait for the next evacuation wave, Dr. Chen said, but his voice lacked conviction. They all knew there would be no next wave. The Council was in full retreat, abandoning everything they couldn't defend. The facility felt enormous with so few people left. Emergency lighting cast long shadows down empty corridors. The computer systems continued their routine data collection as if nothing had changed. Mechanical voices announcing soil temperature readings and atmospheric pressure to an audience that was no longer listening. Kira found herself drawn back to the observation deck. The night sky looked different now. She could see the distant flashes of ships jumping to hyperspace as the evacuation continued across the system. Each flash represented hundreds or thousands of people fleeing toward the core worlds, but not everyone was running. Movement caught her attention near the horizon. Lights flickered in the distance about 20 kilometers away near the mining facility. The human settlement. Kira had almost forgotten about the humans. They had arrived 5 years ago to extract rare minerals from the mountain ranges. Unlike other species that built elaborate colonies, humans seemed content with simple prefab structures and industrial equipment. They kept to themselves, trading only when necessary and showing little interest in the Ashanti research station. Most council species viewed humans as recent additions to galactic civilization. They had achieved faster-than-light travel only a few centuries ago and lacked the advanced technology of older races. The Ashanti had dismissed them as primitive but harmless, another young species that would either mature or fade into obscurity. Now, as evacuation ships fled the system, the human mining facility was still active. Kira could see vehicles moving between buildings, lights in windows, and the steady glow of their industrial processors. Were they unaware of the danger? The Council had broadcast evacuation orders on all frequencies. Every species with basic communication technology should have received the warnings hours ago. Kira activated the facility's long-range sensors and focused them on the human settlement. The readouts showed approximately 200 humans still on planet, with no signs of evacuation preparation. Their ships remained parked in the landing bays. Their mining operations continued running. Either they had not received the evacuation order, or they were choosing to ignore it. Dr. Chen appeared beside her, studying the sensor data with growing confusion. Why aren't they leaving? Maybe their communication systems are damaged, Dr. Webb suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. Kira adjusted the sensors for better resolution. The human settlement buzzed with activity, but it wasn't the panicked chaos she had seen among her own people. The movements looked organized, purposeful, as if they were preparing for something other than evacuation. A chill ran through her small frame as she realized the truth. The humans weren't fleeing because they had decided to stay. In the face of an extinction-level threat that had sent every other species running for their lives, the humans were digging in. The devourers would arrive within days. These strange primitive humans seemed intent on facing them head-on. The sky bled crimson when the devourers came. Kira woke to the sound of tearing metal and screaming air. Through her sleeping chamber window, she watched something impossible descend through Zerion 7's atmosphere. The creature was larger than any ship she had ever seen, its biomechanical surface pulsing with veins of sickly light. Organic components writhed alongside metallic structures, as if machine and monster had merged into something far worse than either alone. Dr. Chen ran into the corridor, his elderly frame shaking with terror. 3 more coming down on the far side of the planet, he gasped. The automated systems detected them before they went silent. Kira pressed her face to the reinforced glass. The lead devourer touched ground about 50 kilometers away, immediately beginning its horrific work. Metallic tentacles erupted from its base, burrowing deep into the planet's crust. Where they touched, the very landscape began to change. Rock dissolved into gray sludge while new structures grew like cancerous tumors. She had read the reports from previous devourer attacks, but seeing it happen was entirely different. These creatures didn't just kill, they remade entire worlds to suit their needs. Within hours, they would transform Zerion 7 into something unrecognizable. "We have to hide in the bunkers," Dr. Webb whispered from behind them. The young geologist's skin had turned pale gray with fear. The research facility's emergency bunkers could sustain 3 people for maybe 2 weeks. After that, they would emerge to find a dead world and no way off planet. Kira knew they were already doomed, but Ashanti instincts demanded they burrow deep and wait for the danger to pass. Instead, she found herself watching the human mining facility through the long-range sensors. The settlement had exploded into activity. Vehicles raced between buildings while humans hauled equipment and supplies with mechanical efficiency. But they weren't loading evacuation ships. They were building something. "Look at this," Kira called to the others. She adjusted the sensor focus to show the humans more clearly. In the 48 hours since the evacuation warnings, the mining facility had been transformed. Heavy machinery formed defensive barriers around key buildings. Weapons that had never existed there before appeared on rooftops and watchtowers. Supply convoys moved in organized patterns between fortified positions. Dr. Chen stared at the readings in disbelief. "They're preparing to fight. Fight what?" Dr. Webb's voice cracked. "Those things have consumed civilizations that lasted millions of years. The Corvani Empire had technology we can't even understand. and the Devourers wiped them out in 3 days. Kira watched a group of humans drag what looked like mining explosives toward the perimeter. The sensor data showed elevated electromagnetic signatures. They were modifying their industrial equipment into weapons. Primitive weapons, perhaps, but weapons nonetheless. A sudden vibration shook the research facility. The nearest Devourer had extended its influence to within 30 kilometers. Through the observation deck, Kira could see the horizon changing color as alien chemistry transformed the atmosphere. The very air would soon become toxic to most galactic species. The bunkers, Dr. Chen said urgently. We have to reach the bunkers now. But Kira remained frozen at the sensors. Something was happening at the human settlement that defied everything she understood about intelligent responses to extinction-level threats. A small convoy of human vehicles was moving, away from their fortified position, not fleeing, advancing. They were driving directly toward the Devourer landing site. They're not running, she whispered. What? The humans. They're not running from it. They're going toward it. Dr. Chen and Dr. Webb crowded around the sensor display. The convoy consisted of 6 vehicles, heavily modified with additional armor and weapons. Through the electromagnetic interference created by the Devourer's terraforming process, Kira could barely make out individual human figures. The convoy stopped about 2 kilometers from the alien creature. For several minutes, nothing happened. Then the humans began setting up equipment, sensors, weapons, communication arrays. They were studying the Devourer. This is insane, Dr. Webb breathed. They're going to get themselves killed. The humans worked for nearly an hour, taking readings and observations while the Devourer continued its world-shaping activities. Several times, smaller biomechanical organisms emerged from the main creature and moved toward the human position. Each time, the humans drove them back with coordinated weapons fire. When they finally retreated to their settlement, they did so in good order. No panic, no casualties that Kira could detect. They had approached a cosmic horror that paralyzed entire star systems, studied it at close range, and returned home safely. Over the following day, Kira watched more human teams repeat the same process. They would approach Devourer positions, gather intelligence, engage any creatures that threatened them, and return to base with their data. Each mission grew bolder than the last. Meanwhile, the research facility's automated systems painted an increasingly grim picture. The atmosphere was changing rapidly. The local ecosystem was collapsing as Devourer influence spread. Native plant life died while alien growths replaced them. The very chemistry of the planet was being rewritten. Dr. Chen and Dr. Webb had retreated to the lower levels, preparing the bunkers for what they saw as their final weeks of life. But Kira remained at the sensors, fascinated by the humans' inexplicable behavior. On the second day after the Devourer's arrival, she witnessed something that challenged everything she thought she knew about warfare against impossible odds. A human strike team had positioned itself near one of the smaller biomechanical organisms that served as the Devourer's scouts. Instead of observing from a distance, they attacked it directly. Using modified mining equipment and improvised explosives, they managed to damage the creature severely before it could retreat to the main body. The attack should have been suicide. The scout organism was larger than any human vehicle and possessed natural weapons that could slice through steel. But the humans had studied its movement patterns, identified weak points in its biomechanical structure, and exploited them with surgical precision. When Devourer reinforcements arrived, the humans were already gone. They had vanished into the landscape, leaving behind only the smoking remains of their target and no trace of their escape route. That night, Kira made a decision that would have horrified her fellow Ashanti. Instead of hiding in the bunkers, she began preparing to leave the research facility. The humans were doing something unprecedented, and she wanted to understand what it was. As she packed emergency supplies and checked the facility's remaining ground vehicles, she wondered if she was making the last mistake of her life. The logical response to the Devourer threat was to hide and hope for rescue. Every instinct her species had developed over millions of years demanded that she burrow deep and wait for the danger to pass. But the humans weren't following that logic. They were writing new rules for how intelligent species could respond to extinction, and despite her terror, Kira found herself drawn to their impossible audacity like a moth to flame. Outside, The sky continued to bleed red as alien chemistry transformed her world. But in the distance, lights still burned in the human settlement. Lights that refused to be extinguished no matter what cosmic horrors had come to claim their world. The underground tunnels smelled of metal and human sweat. Kira pressed herself against the rough stone wall, trying to make sense of what she was seeing in the dim emergency lighting. The mining complex that had once been a simple industrial facility now looked like something from a military textbook, if military textbooks covered wars against cosmic nightmares. She had been following the humans for 3 days, staying just close enough to observe their movements without being detected. Her small size and natural stealth had served her well, though she suspected at least some of them knew she was there. Humans seemed to have surprisingly good peripheral vision for a species that had evolved on a single world. The tunnel she currently occupied stretched for kilometers through the mountain range. What had once been a simple mine shaft was now a fortified corridor lined with supplies, weapons, and communication equipment. Humans moved through it with quiet efficiency, carrying everything from food rations to modified industrial explosives. At the tunnel's main junction, she had found something that defied her understanding of how intelligent species responded to existential threats. Instead of despair or panic, the humans had created what they called a command center. Maps covered every available surface showing devourer positions, movement patterns, and areas of active terraforming. Red pins marked confirmed alien activity, while blue pins showed human observation posts and supply caches. A woman named Anna stood at the center of it all, pointing to various locations while a dozen other humans took notes. Kira had identified her as one of the settlement's geologists, but she moved and spoke like a military commander. The eastern site is expanding faster than the others, Anna was saying. It's producing more of those scout organisms, which suggests it's preparing for the next phase of terraforming. We need to slow it down before it reaches the water table. A bearded man named David, whom Kira recognized as the mining foreman, studied the map with weathered hands. The underground approach is still viable. We can place charges at the primary support structures without getting within range of their defensive systems. That's a 20-kilometer crawl through unmapped tunnels, another human pointed out. If we get lost down there, we're dead. We're dead if we do nothing, David replied matter-of-factly. At least this way we take some of them with us. Kira had heard similar conversations among her own people when faced with dangerous wildlife or natural disasters. But those discussions always centered on avoiding the threat or waiting for it to pass. These humans were actively planning to attack creatures that had destroyed star-spanning civilizations. The most disturbing part was that their first attack had actually worked. 2 days earlier, Kira had watched from a distant ridge as a human strike team infiltrated one of the smaller devourer sites. Using a combination of mining tunnels and natural cave systems, they had approached undetected and planted explosives at key structural points. The resulting collapse had destroyed 3 of the biomechanical organisms and damaged the main creature's terraforming apparatus. The attack should have been impossible. Devourers had sensory capabilities beyond most species' understanding. Their organic components could detect movement, electromagnetic signatures, and even pheromone traces from enormous distances. Yet the humans had found ways to mask all of these signatures using industrial chemicals and electromagnetic scramblers. More importantly, they had discovered something that previous devourer victims had missed. The creature's biomechanical nature created specific vulnerabilities. The organic components relied on the mechanical ones for certain functions and vice versa, damaged the connection between them, and both systems became far less efficient. After the successful attack, Kira had expected the humans to celebrate or at least show some relief. Instead, they had immediately begun analyzing what went wrong. 3 team members had been injured during the retreat. The explosives had been less effective than hoped. The next attack would need to be bigger, better, and more precisely targeted. She watched them work through the night, modifying equipment and refining tactics. Their dedication reminded her of researchers pursuing a complex scientific problem, except their laboratory was a war zone and failure meant extinction. The sound of approaching vehicles interrupted her observations. A convoy was returning from the latest reconnaissance mission, their modified trucks scarred by alien acids and biomechanical weapons. The humans who climbed out looked exhausted but determined. Their leader was a woman named Riley, whom others addressed as Captain. She had arrived several days earlier, with a small group of humans from other parts of the system. Survivors from research stations and cargo ships who had somehow made it to Sirian 7 instead of fleeing toward the core worlds. The northern site is showing new activity, Riley reported to the command center. They're building something bigger than we've seen before. Maybe a communication array or a processing facility. Anna studied the photographs Riley's team had taken. How long before it's operational? 48 hours, maybe less. David ran a hand through his gray hair. If it's a communication array, it could bring more devourers to the system. If it's a processing facility, it'll accelerate the terraforming beyond anything we can interfere with. Then we stop it, Anna said simply. Riley nodded. I've already identified 3 possible approach routes. We'll need at least 50 people for a coordinated assault, plus all our remaining heavy explosives. Kira felt a chill run through her small frame. They were talking about a direct assault on a major devourer installation. The kind of facility that would be defended by dozens of biomechanical organisms and automated defense systems. It would be suicide. But as she listened to their planning session, she realized these humans approached suicide differently than other species. They weren't accepting death as an inevitable outcome. They were calculating how to make their deaths as costly as possible for the enemy. More importantly, they had begun to understand their enemy in ways that previously attacked civilizations never had. The Devourers operated according to predictable patterns. Their biomechanical nature created exploitable weaknesses. Their ancient intelligence was vast but inflexible, unable to adapt quickly to truly novel threats and humans. Kira was learning, specialized in being novel. Over the following hours, she watched them prepare for an assault that should have been impossible. They divided into multiple teams, each with specific objectives and backup plans. They distributed their remaining resources with careful consideration for maximizing damage, even if most teams were destroyed. Most remarkably, they maintained their quiet efficiency even while planning what they all knew was likely a final battle. No dramatic speeches or emotional farewells. Just professional soldiers preparing to do an impossible job because someone had to do it. As dawn approached, Kira made another decision that would have horrified her species. She emerged from her hiding place and walked directly toward the human command center. 20 weapons turned in her direction before she had taken 3 steps. But when the humans saw her small, obviously non-threatening form, they lowered their guns and waited to see what she wanted. I want to help, she said in her accented galactic standard. Anna and Riley exchanged glances. David studied her with intelligent eyes before asking, What can you do? I'm a xenobiologist, Kira replied. I understand how biological systems interact with mechanical ones. And I've been watching your enemy for days. I might know something useful. It was a lie. She knew almost nothing about military tactics or explosives. But she understood scientific methodology, and these humans had turned warfare into a form of applied research. They were experimenting with ways to kill gods, and they needed all the help they could get. Riley smiled grimly. Welcome to the Resistance. Hope you're better at running than most scientists. As Kira found herself swept into the final preparations for humanity's impossible war, she realized she had crossed a line from which there was no return. She was no longer an observer studying strange alien behavior. She had become part of something that defied everything her species believed about survival and rational responses to overwhelming force. The humans were teaching her that sometimes the only rational response to extinction was to fight back. Regardless of the odds, and despite every instinct screaming at her to flee, she found their stubborn audacity oddly comforting. The human war room buzzed with controlled chaos. Maps, photographs, and sensor readings covered every surface while dozens of humans worked at improvised computer stations. Kira sat in a corner trying to process what she was witnessing. In just 2 weeks, the survivors had built something that resembled a military intelligence operation, more than a desperate last stand. Anna leaned over a detailed schematic of devourer biomechanical systems, her finger tracing the connection points between organic and artificial components. If Kira's analysis is correct, their neural networks depend on these coupling systems to coordinate between biological and mechanical functions. Riley nodded, studying the data Kira had helped compile. Disrupt the connections and both systems become significantly less effective. It's like cutting the bridge between 2 armies. David entered the room carrying a metal case filled with modified mining equipment. The electromagnetic pulse generators are ready. Not pretty, but they'll produce the frequency patterns Kira identified. Over the past week, Kira had found herself working more closely with the humans than she had ever worked with members of her own species. They had welcomed her scientific knowledge without question, incorporating her observations into their tactical planning with impressive efficiency. More importantly, they had listened when she suggested something that would never have occurred to military minds. The Devourer's greatest strength might also be their greatest weakness. The hive mind communication system, she explained to a group of team leaders. It allows instant coordination across enormous distances, but it also creates a single point of failure. If we can disrupt their network at the right frequency and amplitude, their individual organisms become isolated. Captain Riley studied the technical specifications Kira had drawn up. How long would the disruption last? Unknown, Kira admitted. But based on what I've observed, their system would need time to adapt and reconnect. Maybe minutes, maybe hours. Long enough for a coordinated strike on all their installations simultaneously, David said thoughtfully. Anna spread out a planet-wide tactical map. We have teams positioned near 7 major sites. If we hit them all at once while their communication is disrupted, we might actually win this, Riley finished. The word win hung in the air like an alien concept. Kira had never heard any species discuss winning against the Devourers. Previous civilizations had focused on evacuation, hiding, or buying time for escape. The idea of actually defeating the cosmic horrors seemed impossibly arrogant. But as she watched the humans plan their coordinated assault, Kira began to understand that arrogance might be exactly what the situation required. The key to their strategy wasn't superior technology or ancient wisdom. It was the human ability to look at an impossible problem and immediately start figuring out how to solve it. Where other species saw inevitable defeat, humans saw a puzzle to be worked through methodically. They had spent days studying devourer behavior patterns, identifying weaknesses, and developing countermeasures. Their approach reminded Kira of how researchers tackled complex scientific problems, breaking them down into manageable components and addressing each one systematically. The timing has to be perfect, Riley explained during a briefing with all team leaders. The electromagnetic pulse will only give us a narrow window. Miss it, and they'll adapt their frequencies to prevent future disruption. A woman named Sarah, who led one of the demolition teams, raised her hand. What about the secondary organisms? The scouts and defenders? They'll be confused initially but will default to defensive behaviors, Kira answered. However, without coordination from the main hive mind, they'll be operating on local programming only. Predictable patterns, David smiled grimly. Predictable patterns we can exploit. Over the following hours, Kira watched the humans finalize their impossible plan. They would strike simultaneously at dawn, using the electromagnetic pulse generators to disrupt devourer communications, while demolition teams attacked the primary installations. Support teams would handle the confused but still dangerous secondary organisms. If everything went perfectly, they might destroy or severely damage the devourer presence on Zerion 7. If anything went wrong, they would all die, but at least they would take some of the invaders with them. The night before the assault, Kira found herself unable to sleep. She wandered through the tunnel complex, observing the humans as they made their final preparations. What she saw challenged every assumption her species had developed about intelligent responses to overwhelming threats. There was no panic, no despair, no futile prayers to uncaring gods. Instead, she found humans calmly checking their equipment, reviewing tactical plans, and sharing quiet conversations with teammates. They approached their possible extinction with the same methodical professionalism they brought to mining operations. In the medical station, she watched Dr. Martinez, a physician who had arrived with Riley's group, prepare field surgery kits. The human woman worked with steady hands, organizing supplies she hoped would never be needed but prepared for the worst possible outcomes. Nervous? Dr. Martinez asked, noticing Kira's presence. Terrified, Kira admitted. Your people seem remarkably calm for individuals facing certain death. We're not facing certain death, Martinez replied, continuing her preparations. We're facing uncertain death. There's a difference. Kira considered this distinction. Explain. Certain death means you have no choices left. You just wait for the end. Uncertain death means you still have options. Still have things you can do that might change the outcome. Martinez paused in her work to look directly at Kira. As long as we're still fighting, we're still alive. In the communications center, Kira found technicians led by a man named Robert, who had managed to establish contact with human survivors throughout the system. Their reports painted a grim picture. Most other worlds had been completely overrun, but several small groups were still active, using the tactics developed on Zerion 7 to conduct their own resistance operations. We've shared everything we've learned, Robert explained. Every successful attack, every discovered weakness, every tactical innovation. If we fail tomorrow, at least other human teams will know what works and what doesn't. The idea struck Kira as profound. Even in the face of potential extinction, the humans were thinking beyond their immediate survival. They were building a knowledge base that could help others continue the fight. In the weapons facility, she watched engineers make final adjustments to equipment that had never been designed for warfare. Mining charges became precision explosives. Industrial cutters became armor-piercing weapons. Communication arrays became electromagnetic warfare systems. The humans had taken tools meant for peaceful purposes and transformed them into instruments of war. But more than that, they had discovered principles that could be applied anywhere. Other species with different technology could use the same basic concepts to defend their worlds. As dawn approached, Kira took her assigned position with Anna's team. She carried a modified sensor package that would help coordinate the electromagnetic pulse timing. It wasn't a weapon, but it was her contribution to humanity's impossible war. Looking around at the humans making final preparations, she realized she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. For the first time, an intelligent species was not just fighting back against the Devourers, they were doing so with a realistic chance of success. The monsters were indeed fearsome, possessing power that could reshape worlds and destroy civilizations. But humanity had shown her something that might be even more powerful. The absolute refusal to accept defeat, combined with the intelligence to find solutions where none should exist. As the first rays of dawn touched the corrupted landscape of Zerion 7, Kira prepared to discover whether human determination could actually overcome cosmic horror. Win or lose, she knew she was about to witness something that would change how intelligent species viewed their place in the universe. The age of running from monsters was ending. The age of fighting back was about to begin. The electromagnetic pulse hit at exactly 0600 hours. Kira felt it as a strange tingling sensation that made her fur stand on end. Across the corrupted landscape of Zerion 7, invisible waves of carefully calibrated energy swept through the Devourer communication networks, severing the connections that bound their hive mind together. For one perfect moment, the cosmic horrors that had consumed 47 star systems were reduced to confused individual organisms operating on local programming alone. All teams, execute. Riley's voice crackled through the communications network. Anna's demolition team moved with practiced efficiency. Kira followed close behind, her sensor package recording everything as they approached the Eastern Devourer installation. Around them, the alien-transformed landscape looked like a nightmare made real. Twisted metal growths jutting from ground that had once been solid rock, pulsing organic structures that breathed toxic gases into the atmosphere. But for the first time since the invasion began, the installation wasn't actively responding to their approach. The biomechanical guardians wandered in seemingly random patterns, their usual coordinated defense behaviors replaced by confused circling movements. Pulse is holding, Anna reported into her radio. Target is vulnerable. David's voice came back from the northern site. Confirmed. They're acting like someone cut their phone lines. Kira watched Anna's team split into 3 groups, each approaching a critical structural point of the massive Devourer construction. The organic components still pulsed with alien life, but the mechanical system showed signs of reduced activity. Without hive mind coordination, the creature was operating at perhaps 60% efficiency. Still dangerous, but no longer invincible. The first explosions lit up the dawn sky from the western installation. Riley's team had reached their target ahead of schedule. Through her sensor package, Kira could detect the massive energy signature as primary support systems failed, and the Devourer construction began collapsing in on itself. Western site is down, Riley reported. Repeat, Western site is neutralized. Anna planted her charges with the precision of someone who had spent years working with industrial explosives. But these weren't random demolition jobs. Every placement was calculated to exploit the specific weaknesses Kira had identified in Devourer biomechanical interfaces. Charges set, Anna announced. Everyone fall back to safe distance. They ran across terrain that shifted and writhed under their feet. Behind them, the Devourer installation began showing signs of awareness, its organic sensors finally detecting the threat. Biomechanical organisms emerged from hidden chambers, moving to intercept the retreating humans. But without hive mind coordination, their response was predictable and disorganized. The creatures followed standard defensive protocols instead of adapting to the specific threat. David's team had prepared for exactly this scenario. Incoming hostiles from the south, Kira called out, reading her sensors. I see them, Anna replied calmly. She triggered a series of smaller charges that had been pre-positioned along their escape route. The explosions didn't destroy the pursuing organisms, but they channeled them into a narrow corridor where concentrated weapons fire could be most effective. The humans' tactical adaptability impressed Kira more than their weapons or explosives. When their electromagnetic pulse began showing signs of weakening, they immediately shifted to backup communication frequencies. When biomechanical defenders adapted to their explosive patterns, they switched to chemical weapons. Every time the Devourers countered one approach, the humans had another ready. Northern Site reporting. David's voice came through with background sounds of heavy combat. Primary structure is compromised, but we've got heavy resistance from secondary organisms. Could use some help here. Southern team is en route, Sarah's voice replied. Hold position for 3 minutes. Kira realized she was witnessing something unprecedented in galactic military history. The humans weren't just fighting, they were fighting smart. Every engagement fed information back to other teams. Every successful tactic was immediately shared across their communication network. Most remarkably, they were winning. The explosions from Anna's charges lit up the sky like a small sun. The entire eastern installation shuddered, its biomechanical components separating as the connection interfaces Kira had identified were severed. Without the integration between organic and mechanical systems, both components began failing catastrophically. Eastern site neutralized, Anna reported with satisfaction, moving to support Northern team. Through her sensors, Kira tracked the battle across the entire planet. 7 major Devourer installations were under simultaneous attack by coordinated human teams, despite facing cosmic horrors that had destroyed star-spanning civilizations. The humans were methodically dismantling their enemies' infrastructure. The key wasn't superior firepower. The Devourers still possessed vastly more advanced technology. The key was that humans fought like they thought. Every engagement was treated as a learning opportunity. Every failure led to immediate adaptation and new approaches. When their electromagnetic pulse finally failed after 47 minutes, the Devourers attempted to re-establish hive-mind communication. But the humans had anticipated this. They had spent the disruption period not just attacking installations, but also planting jammers and communication scramblers throughout the network. The cosmic horrors found themselves fighting a guerrilla war against an enemy that refused to engage on their terms. All teams. Phase 2. Riley's voice commanded. Kira had thought the coordinated assault was the humans' final gambit. She was wrong. The destruction of the major installations was only the beginning. Now came something even more audacious, a direct attack on the central processing hub that coordinated all Devourer activity on the planet. Anna's team regrouped with David's survivors at a staging area 5 kilometers from the primary target. The central hub was larger than any structure Kira had ever seen, rising nearly a kilometer into the toxic atmosphere, while extending deep into the planet's crust. That thing has been consuming our world for 2 weeks, David said grimly. Time to return the favor. The assault plan was insane even by human standards. They would infiltrate the structure using mining tunnels, fight their way to the core processing center, and detonate enough explosives to collapse the entire facility. The casualties would be enormous, but success would effectively end the Devourer presence on Zirion 7. Riley gathered the surviving team leaders around a detailed schematic. We estimate 60% casualties minimum. Anyone who wants to stay behind can guard our escape routes. Not a single human stepped back. As they began their approach to the central hub, Kira found herself reflecting on what she had witnessed over the past few weeks. The Devourers represented everything terrifying about the universe: vast alien intelligence, incomprehensible technology, and the absolute certainty of extinction for anyone who opposed them. But humanity had shown her something she had never expected to see: the power that came from refusing to be impressed by impossibility. These creatures didn't treat cosmic horrors as gods to be feared or fled from. They treated them as problems to be solved. The final battle began as they entered the biomechanical maze of the central hub. Organic corridors pulsed with alien life, while mechanical systems hummed with energy that could power entire cities. Around every corner waited defenses that had been designed to repel the most advanced military forces in the galaxy. The humans navigated it all with the steady professionalism of miners exploring a dangerous tunnel system. When they encountered obstacles, they found ways around them. When they faced enemies, they eliminated them with minimal fuss. When their equipment failed, they improvised replacements from whatever materials were available. They fought their way deeper into the structure, not because they were fearless, but because they had made a calculated decision that fighting was more likely to result in survival than running. And once they had made that decision, they committed to it completely. At the core of the central hub, they found something that would have paralyzed most species with existential dread: the central processing nexus that controlled Devourer operations across multiple star systems. It was vast, alien, and utterly beyond their technological understanding. Riley looked at it for a moment, then began placing explosive charges at structural points with the same methodical efficiency she had shown all along. "Big enough boom?" she asked David. "Should do the job," he replied, checking his detonator readings. As they began their withdrawal from the central hub, Kira realized that she had witnessed the most important moment in galactic history. For the first time, an intelligent species had looked directly at cosmic horror and seen not an unstoppable force, but merely another engineering problem requiring a sufficiently dramatic solution. The explosion could be seen from orbit. Kira watched from the safety of the mining tunnels as the central Devourer hub collapsed in a cascade of failing biomechanical systems. The structure that had risen like a cancer from Zerion 7's surface folded in on itself, taking with it the computational power needed to coordinate the invasion across multiple star systems. The ground shook for nearly 10 minutes as secondary explosions rippled through the underground network. When the tremors finally stopped, a massive crater marked the spot where humanity had declared that cosmic horrors were not, in fact, unstoppable forces of nature. Riley's voice crackled through the communication network, transmitted from somewhere deep in the collapsing structure. "Central hub is down. Repeat, central hub is neutralized. All teams withdraw to safe positions." But Kira could hear the strain in her voice. The final assault team had paid the expected price for their impossible victory. Over the following hours, the surviving humans regrouped at their tunnel complex. The casualty reports painted a sobering picture: nearly 40% losses, with many of their most experienced fighters among the dead. Any other species would have considered it a Pyrrhic victory at best. The humans treated it as unqualified success. "Look at this," Anna said, studying readings from their remaining sensor stations. "Devourer activity is down by 80% across the entire planet. The surviving organisms are operating independently, without central coordination." David nodded with satisfaction. "More importantly, our long-range sensors are picking up movement in the outer system. The Devourers are withdrawing from other worlds." Kira stared at the data in disbelief. "They're retreating?" "First tactical withdrawal in recorded galactic history," Anna confirmed. Apparently losing a central processing hub is a bigger problem for them than anyone realized. The implications hit Kira like a physical blow. The humans hadn't just survived a Devourer invasion. They had inflicted enough damage to force a species-wide strategic recalculation. The cosmic horrors that had consumed 47 star systems were pulling back, because a few hundred mining engineers had proven more trouble than they were worth. Over the next 3 days, rescue ships began arriving from the core worlds. The first Council vessels approached Zerion 7 with extreme caution, expecting to find another dead world added to the Devourer's grim tally. Instead, they found humans rebuilding infrastructure and planning improvements to their defensive systems. Captain Henderson of the Council rescue ship Aurora could barely hide his amazement during the initial contact. "How many survivors do you have?" he asked David over the communication channel. "About 160 last count," David replied, "though we expect more stragglers to turn up over the next few days." 160 out of how many total? Maybe 250 when the invasion started. There was a long silence from the rescue ship. "You're telling me you achieved a 70% survival rate against a devourer invasion?" "Give or take," David confirmed. "We lost some good people, but most of us made it through." Kira listened to the conversation with growing understanding of why the council representatives sounded so stunned. Every previous devourer encounter had resulted in complete extinction of the targeted population. The idea that any significant percentage could survive, let alone fight back successfully, challenged fundamental assumptions about how intelligent species responded to overwhelming threats. When the rescue ships finally landed, Kira watched their crews emerge with expressions of barely controlled amazement. They had come expecting to evacuate traumatized refugees from a dead world. Instead, they found humans who were already planning how to apply their hard-won knowledge to other potential invasion sites. "We've identified 17 tactical approaches that can be adapted to different planetary environments," Riley explained to a gathering of council military officers. "The key isn't matching their technology. It's exploiting the inherent weaknesses in their biomechanical integration systems." She spread out detailed technical specifications that the human survivors had compiled during their resistance campaign. Every successful attack had been analyzed, documented, and refined into replicable tactical doctrine. "This electromagnetic disruption frequency works on their hive mind communication," she continued, pointing to specific technical data. "These chemical compounds interfere with their organic components. These structural weak points can be targeted with conventional explosives for maximum damage." The council officers studied the documents with growing excitement. For the first time in galactic history, they were looking at proven methods for fighting back against the devourers, not just surviving their attacks but actually defeating them. "You're sharing all of this freely?" asked Commander Phillips of the Council Defense Force. "Of course," Anna replied as if the question was odd. "The next time these things show up, everyone should know how to fight them." Kira realized she was witnessing something that transcended military victory. The humans weren't just defending their own world. They were changing the fundamental relationship between intelligent species and existential threats. They had taken knowledge gained through desperate struggle and made it available to anyone who might need it. Over the following weeks, as Zarian 7 was gradually restored to habitability, delegations arrived from across the galaxy. The Ashanti Collective sent xenobiologists to study devourer remains. The Corvani remnant dispatched military engineers to analyze human tactical innovations. Even species that rarely interacted with the Council came to learn from humanity's impossible victory. Kira found herself serving as translator and cultural liaison, helping visiting researchers understand human military philosophy. The conversations often followed similar patterns. "How did they overcome their fear?" asked Dr. Veltan, a psychologist from the Centauri Federation. "They didn't overcome it," Kira explained. "They used it. Fear motivated them to prepare more thoroughly, think more creatively, and fight more effectively. But the devourers represent extinction-level threats. How do they process that psychologically?" "They break it down into manageable problems," Kira replied. "Instead of seeing an unstoppable cosmic horror, they see a large biological system with mechanical augmentation that happens to have exploitable vulnerabilities." The visiting researchers struggled with this concept. Most galactic species had evolved psychological frameworks that treated overwhelming threats as natural disasters to be endured rather than problems to be solved. The human approach, immediate tactical analysis followed by systematic countermeasures, struck them as almost incomprehensibly audacious. But the results spoke for themselves. In addition to their victory on Zarian 7, reports were arriving from other systems where small human populations had used similar tactics to drive off or destroy devourer advance forces. The cosmic nightmare that had paralyzed galactic civilization for millennia was being systematically dismantled by mining engineers and cargo ship crews. On her final day on Zarian 7, Kira stood at the observation deck of the rebuilt research facility. The landscape still showed scars from the invasion. areas where alien chemistry had permanently altered the local ecosystem, but new growth was already appearing. Humans had managed to neutralize most of the toxic compounds and were working to restore the planet's original environmental balance. David found her there as the twin suns set behind the restored mountains. "Heard you're staying," he said. "The council offered me a position studying human tactical psychology," Kira confirmed. "They want to understand how your species approaches impossible problems. Learn anything useful so far?" Kira considered the question carefully. "I think I'm beginning to understand what real power looks like." "Oh? And what's that?" "Most species see the universe as something that happens to them. You see it as something you can affect through your actions." She paused, watching human engineers work on infrastructure repairs in the valley below. The Devourers were indeed fearsome. They represented everything terrifying about existence in an uncaring cosmos. "But you showed me that intelligence combined with determination can be more powerful than any cosmic horror." David smiled. "We're not special, Kira. We just refuse to give up when things get difficult." "That refusal might be the most special thing in the galaxy," she replied. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky, Kira reflected on everything she had witnessed. The monsters had been fearsome beyond imagination, wielding power that could reshape worlds and destroy civilizations. But humanity had shown her something more impressive than any weapon or technology: the absolute determination to keep fighting, keep adapting, and keep finding solutions no matter how impossible the odds appeared. The age of running from cosmic horrors was ending. Thanks to a few hundred humans who had looked at extinction and decided to treat it as merely another engineering problem, intelligent species across the galaxy were learning that they didn't have to accept inevitable defeat. They could choose to fight back. And sometimes, if they were smart enough and stubborn enough, they could actually win. In her final report to the Ashanti Collective, Kira wrote, "Humanity has taught us that the most dangerous thing in the universe is not ancient cosmic horror or advanced alien technology. It is an intelligent species that refuses to accept limitations and possesses the creativity to find solutions where none should exist. The Devourers learned this lesson too late. Let us hope we learn it in time to benefit from their example." The monsters were fearsome, but humanity had shown her what real power looked like, and it was more terrifying and more hopeful than anything the universe had produced before.